over the span of 3 weeks, and they had no trouble getting rid of the fresh apples.
The growing prices in the grocery stores are really tough for a lot of families, and it's honestly gotten worse since COVID.
Following West Virginia's rescue program, the USDA announced an additional $100 million purchase to relieve the apple surplus in other states around the country. This is the largest government buy of apples and apple products to date, but with the harvest window coming to an end, many growers have already left their apples to drop and rot. For NPR News, I'm Alan Hinich in Inwood, West Virginia.
It's WNYC. Stay with us. Marketplace is next. Shopping malls have transformed the way we shop and turned it into big business.
And that has a lot to do with the financing and ownership of malls. By the time you get to the 90s, there start to be these huge mall ownership conglomerates.
A look at the history of malls next on Marketplace. We'll have more All Things Considered at 7 o'clock. Stay with us.
WNYC supporters include Tools of the Mind. The research and play-based curriculum combines professional development and a comprehensive pre-K and K curriculum designed to build self-regulation skills. Toolsofthemind.org.
This is WNYC 93.9 FM and AM 820. NPR News and the New York Conversation.
Marketplace is supported by Drexel University, whose model of experiential education infuses academics with real experience, yielding impactful results. More at drexel.edu.
In which the phrase market composition makes real estate data make some sense. From American Public Media, this is Marketplace.
Marketplace is supported by the United States Postal Service, offering holiday postage stamps for purchase at more than 40,000 supermarkets, drugstores, office suppliers, and wholesale clubs. And by Pi Insurance, helping small businesses thrive with commercial insurance designed to be as easy as pie, so you can get back to business. Learn more from your agent or at iwantpie.com.
In Los Angeles, I'm Kai Ryssdal. It is Monday today, the 27th of November. Good as always to have you along, everybody. You know, sometimes the interesting story in the economic data is not actually the economic data. Case in point, this morning's news of real estate, specifically new single-family homes. Sales of those new homes were off 5.6% in October from a month earlier, which, okay, that's a data point. Here, though, is another one. New home sales are up 18% from this time a year ago. In fact, newly built homes are a bigger part of the housing market now than they have been in at least 40 years. Marketplace's Megan McCarty-Carino explains what's going on.
High mortgage rates are going to put a damper on home sales no matter what, says Anirban Basu, an economist with Sage Policy Group. But in today's housing market, new construction has some advantages for buyers. Namely,
that's what's available to them.
The number of existing homes on the market is near record lows, largely because of what Basu calls the lock-in effect.
You've got folks out there with a 30-year fixed mortgage rate at less than 3%. Even if you wanted to move, you're not moving, and so that home is not available for purchase.
New homes now account for about a third of all houses for sale, more than double the historical average. Nitin Gupta is a real estate agent in Dallas-Fort Worth. He says with prices and mortgage rates high across the board,
people are thinking, okay, we may as well get a new home where you don't have to worry about maintenance or repairs, and you're getting the latest and greatest design and architecture and amenities.
And builders tend to make more motivated sellers, says Daryl Fairweather, chief economist at Redfin.
Builders have very different incentives than existing homeowners. They don't care what rates were a couple of years ago. They just want to get their inventory sold for the highest price the market supports.
Developers have been offering deals that offset the mortgage rate, cut prices, or add free upgrades. Because today's new homes broke ground during yesterday's low-interest housing boom.
So they were a bit more aggressive than they would have been if they knew rates were going to approach nearly 8% for a 30-year fixed rate.
Since then, Fairweather says new construction has slowed. meaning deals down the line could be harder to come by. I'm Megan McCarty-Carino for Marketplace.
Wall Street on this Monday down just a little bit, though. We'll have the details when we do the numbers. Next to airports over the Thanksgiving weekend, shopping malls were probably some of the most crowded places in the country, which is kind of funny. Not ha-ha funny, because for years, a lot of us in business and economic journalism, specifically including us here, have reported on the death of malls. Turns out, though, those malls are alive and kicking. Some of them, in fact, doing better than they were in the before times. Marketplace's Kristen Schwab takes a look at the history of the mall and where things stand today.
To a lot of Minnesotans, Southdale Center is just another mall. To Frank Edgerton Martin, who grew up around here, it's an essential piece of history. We're in the mall's main court, looking up at a giant steel tree with abstract gold leaves. It's a sculpture by Harry Bertoia.
I think it's one of the most important mid-century sculptures around in a public space in the United States.
One of the most important mid-century sculptures around, hanging out by a kiosk that sells phone cases. Maybe an odd place for prominent art now, but in Edgerton Martin's day, this mall was the place to be.
As a child, my sister and I were just entranced by this place. And everyone of my generation who grew up here remember coming here and how magical it was.
Southdale was the first indoor mall in the country. It opened in 1956 when suburbia was growing. Southdale had clothing stores, but it also had European-style sidewalk cafes, minus the sidewalk. The orchestra even held balls here. The idea was to create a place where the community could escape from the freezing Minnesota winter and socialize without the fuss of going downtown.
The local paper is quoted as saying, "White gloves are a thing of the past at Southdale." Because in my mother's generation, they would think of going downtown without wearing white gloves.
With the success of Southdale, malls took off and over the years transformed shopping from a special occasion into an everyday social activity. Think mall rats.
And we see malls depicted all the time in popular culture.
Alexandra Lang is the author of Meet Me by the Fountain, a book about mall history. She says by the 1990s, the U.S. had as many as 2,000 malls. They became a big business.
And that has a lot to do with the financing and ownership of malls. By the time you get to the 90s, there start to be these huge mall ownership conglomerates.
Mall conglomerates prioritized tenants, mostly retailers, that could afford higher rents. Lang says that led to focusing less on the unique needs of locals and more on mass appeal.
I mean, it's like anything else. Once you have more, you have to standardize the product.
Shopping centers just a few miles apart became indistinguishable. Meanwhile, in the early aughts, retail took a hit. With the Great Recession, retail sales dropped to 35-year lows and online shopping grew.
That really started to make the dead mall narrative rise to the surface. And when we started to see kind of mass closure and mass failure of a lot of malls.
Underperforming malls leave suburbia with a big problem. Michael Buriti, an urban planning professor at Ball State University, says malls are often a major property taxpayer.
And so if the mall fails, it means that we have a vacant building that no longer is able to contribute to the community's economy.
He says the mall needs to go back to its original vision as a multi-purpose place.
Not just a place to buy things, but also a place where you can socialize, you can have an experience.
That's what's happening at Southdale Center in Minnesota. Edgerton Martin and I walked by a fancy gym with co-working stations and pickleball. An upscale grocer will soon become an anchor tenant, and he points out high-end apartments have gone up nearby.
And you would say, why would you want to live next to a shopping mall parking lot? Well, they're bringing in hotels and movies and theaters, putting them right next to it.
It turns out in the mall industry, what's old is new again. In Edina, Minnesota, I'm Kristen Schwab for Marketplace.
Whether they're hitting the mall for their holiday bargain hunting or shopping from the couch, for those in search of discounts, and I mean, who's not, it has been a busy few days. Adobe Analytics says the best bargains on toys and clothes so far this season came yesterday. Today is apparently the best day to shop for deals on electronics. If appliances are on your list, you might want to hold out until Thursday. But this year, as consumers continue to drive this economy, retailers are approaching their discounting a little bit differently. Marketplace's Savannah Marr has that one.
For the last couple of years, inventory drove holiday discounting. Retailers had too much of the wrong kind of stuff, say televisions, and markdowns helped get them out the door, says Christina Boney with Moody's Analytics.
Many retailers have made progress throughout 2023 on the inventory side.
Boney says consumers have changed too. For one, we're not as worried about stores running out of things, and higher interest rates and inflation are putting pressure on our wallets.
We're definitely seeing a consumer that is very purposeful in their buying.
Like Vivek Pandya, who's hunting for a deal on a PS5.
I definitely do compare shop on price, especially for some of the game consoles.
Pandya looks at e-commerce for Adobe Analytics. He says lots of consumers are using price comparison apps and holding out for the best deals. So retailers want to draw them off the sidelines.
They're looking to discount in a way where they can have the consumer shop with them versus anyone else.
And this year, retailers are facing more outside competition, says Akshay Rao with the University of Minnesota.
There is a trend for people to buy experiences rather than things as gifts.
Like tickets to a play. With such strong spending on services recently, Rao says retailers might see discounts as a tool to claw some back. Christina Boney with Moody's says sales from this week's promotions will determine how the rest of the shopping season looks.
It's a little bit of trial by error.
If sales aren't as strong as retailers hope, Boney says we could see some steeper discounts closer to the holidays. I'm Savannah Marr for Marketplace.
Here's the reality of the planet getting hotter. We are just going to have to do energy differently if we're going to stop putting carbon into the atmosphere. Electrification is an increasingly popular option, not just cars and trucks and buses, but heating systems too. The state of New York figures its electricity use is going to double by 2050. Utilities in Massachusetts say they're going to have to increase their infrastructure investments 8-fold to accommodate the growth needed in their power grid. And that, and some legislative encouragement as well, has lit a fire under those utilities, which are looking for ways to reduce those costs. Marketplace's Sabri Benishore has that one.
On the far end of a parking lot in Framingham, Massachusetts, there's what kind of looks like a 30-foot tall mechanical scorpion's tail. What is this thing?
So what we're looking at now is actually a drill rig.
Nikki Bruno is Vice President of Clean Technologies at utility Eversource.
But it's a little bit different than, say, what you may notice from if you had like a water well drilled, which is straight up and down, or a vertical drill. This is actually deviated drilling.
It's drilling, but it's drilling at an angle.
Exactly.
The drill rig is not tapping the ground for oil. It is creating a network of boreholes, 700 feet deep, connecting to pipes that loop under the neighborhood. The pipes will be full of water, carrying thermal energy for heating or cooling buildings.
We're trying to test the success of a networked geothermal system.
Geothermal, but there's no lava, no volcano in Massachusetts, just the constant 55 or so degree temperature underground, which is stable no matter what the season is. So the ground, just the regular old ground, is like a battery. It can supply and even store energy.
You can do this in all 50 states. It's basically utilizing the constant temperature of the earth as a heat source in the winter and a heat sink in the summer.
Ryan Dougherty is president of the Geothermal Exchange Organization, the trade group. To move thermal energy into or out of the underground pipes, you need a device called a ground source heat pump in every building. It's powered by electricity, and it either extracts heat from the water pipes to warm a building up or offloads heat into the pipes to cool the building down.
It is very much like the refrigerator in your kitchen, but it can work both ways.
Construction is almost finished at the geothermal pilot project in Framingham at a cost of $14 million paid by the utility. Participants don't pay for the install, and their heating and cooling bills are expected to fall. What makes the 2-year project the first of its kind run by a utility is the fact that the system will span a whole neighborhood, a low-income housing project, a gas station, a cabinet store, a fire station, all connected in a network.
When you connect a bunch of different buildings that all have different sort of thermal needs, you can basically move the energy around in a circuit where it's needed or away from where it's not needed.
In theory, one building's exhaust heat can help warm another building up.
That ice rink and the greenhouse down the street, they are canceling each other's loads.
Audrey Schulman is a co-founder of HEAT, a nonprofit incubator for climate solutions. She says heat pumps connected to geothermal loops are twice as efficient as traditional heat pumps that pull heat out of the air.
Ground source heat pumps in general are one of the most efficient methods of providing heating and cooling. And then networking them together, you get additional, efficiencies.
That efficiency is why 26 utilities representing 50% of all gas customers in the country are actively exploring this technology. They are staring down the barrel of an exploding demand for electricity as the country decarbonizes.
You're going to need to electrify a ton of buildings.
Alexander Buell is director of portfolio planning and analysis at energy company Con Edison. Geothermal networks could reduce that burden significantly. They are not cheap to install. Schulman says the upfront cost of installing one is 60% higher than a similar gas system.
But because you're getting rid of the whole fuel cost, you're substituting it with that very, very efficient amount of electricity. At the end, the customer energy bills will be lower, and the customer is always the one who pays for the system in the end.
The pilots emerging in 13 states are designed to test the economic viability and effectiveness of geothermal networks in practice. Buell at Con Edison is hopeful.
We as a society will need to do a massive reimagining of our energy systems over the next few decades to be able to reduce our carbon emissions.
Part of that may be the free battery underneath our feet. In New York, I'm Sabri Benishore for Marketplace. Coming up.
It's basically, a Venn diagram of a bar and class.
Open a textbook and a bar tab all at the same time. First, though, let's do the numbers. The Dow Industrial's off 56 points today, a tenth of 1%, 35,333. The Nasdaq down 9 points, less than a 10%, 14,241. The S&P 500 off 8 points, 0.2% there. 45 and 50. Megan McCarty-Carino was telling us about trends in new home sales, as in there are more of them. So checking some home builders on Wall Street. KB Home and Lennar both shaved off 0.6% today. Toll Brothers down about a 10%. Kristen Schwab told us about the up and down and maybe up again history of indoor shopping malls. So checking some old school anchored tenants, why don't we? Kohl's retreated 0.4%. Macy's lifted 0.2%. Nordstrom advanced a full 2% today. As for mall owners, thanks for asking. The biggest is Simon Property Group. Its properties include the Empire Mall in Sioux Falls, South Dakota, Tippecanoe Mall in Lafayette, Indiana, and King of Prussia Mall in King of Prussia, Pennsylvania. Simon gained 0.7% today. Bond prices were up. Yield on the 10-year Treasury down 4.38%. You're listening to Marketplace.
Marketplace is supported by Michigan Technological University, where data science students in Michigan's first and only computing-focused college master data mining, predictive analytics, and ethics to prepare for tomorrow's big data challenges. Online at mtu.edu/computing. And by the Peter G. Peterson Foundation, a nonpartisan organization dedicated to raising awareness and accelerating action on America's fiscal challenges to build a brighter economic future for the next generation. Learn more at pgpf.org. And by Bitwarden, the enterprise password manager for security and productivity. Easy to use with username and password autofill, biometric unlock, and availability on any device. More at bitwarden.com.
Support for WNYC comes from Yale School of Management Executive Education, presenting Women on Boards, a program that coaches accomplished women to secure a seat at the board table. Live online May 25th and 1 week on campus in June. More by searching for Yale Women on Boards.
On the next All of It, you've likely heard about New York City's high school admissions process and may have thought it was too crazy to be believed. Writer and performer Milo Kramer had a front row seat to that drama as a tutor. Now they've turned that experience into a show called School Pictures at Playwrights Horizons. Milo Kramer joins me to discuss. Plus, live music from Nellie McKay. I'm Allison Stewart. Join me for All of It, weekdays at noon on WNYC.
You're listening to Marketplace on WNYC. Coming up in the 7 o'clock hour, of all things considered, Americans say that they're worried about the economy, but the numbers say different. The holiday shopping season is set to look pretty good after the Thanksgiving weekend. Stay with us.
This is Marketplace. I'm Kai Ryssdal. Global trade is where we go now. There was some fresh data out this morning from the World Trade Organization. Once a quarter, the WTO puts together what it calls a barometer of global goods trade. Goods, of course, stuff, not services. The WTO says goods trade volumes are going to pick up in the short term after being kind of droopy the past 12 months or so. Marketplace's Justin Ho spent his day asking people where global trade might be headed.
Two areas where trade has really picked up: auto parts and electronic components. Coleman Nee, senior economist at the World Trade Organization, says that's likely because demand for vehicles is high, especially electric vehicles.
There's been pretty strong growth in that one sector. It's sort of the one area that's standing out.
Nee says that says a lot about how consumers are feeling.
People tend to not make big ticket purchases when they're feeling uncertain about the future. So there's probably some degree of recovery of economic sentiment on the part of consumers.
But part of the reason why trade seems so good right now is because last year was not great. Phil Levy is chief economist at the supply chain management company Flexport. He says 12 months ago for car makers, getting semiconductor chips and other auto parts were still problems,
which have gotten themselves largely sorted out, and you were seeing that reflected in the numbers.
Meanwhile, the WTO says raw materials trade is struggling. Think lumber. Levy says importers are still trying to figure out what consumers want to buy and how much.
People are trying to find what is the right level. What do I want to have for inventories? What is demand going to look like? You've seen demand swinging around.
There are signs that global trade is starting to normalize. For instance, last year, many consumers shifted their spending away from goods and towards services. But Megan Schoenberger, senior economist with KPMG, says that trend could be ending.
Goods and services trade may be in more of a balance that was similar to the pre-pandemic level. So people are buying goods and also buying services around the same amounts.
And that, Schoenberger says, looks a lot like global trade before the pandemic. I'm Justin Ho for Marketplace.
In many a bar, in many a college town, many times, the person pouring the drinks is going to have an advanced degree or maybe two. As academia struggles to absorb aspiring professors, many of those PhDs turn to lower paying jobs as adjunct instructors. They get paid per class to teach, say, freshman English, and thus, because of the lower pay, often have to have side hustles to get by. There's a new bar in Durham, North Carolina, that's trying to bring those two worlds together, bars and academia. From North Carolina Public Radio, Liz Schlemmer has the story.
Early on a Wednesday evening, customers trickle through the back door of the Speakeasy in downtown Durham, North Carolina. First, they grab a drink at the bar.
Can I get a Oaxacan old-fashioned?
Then customers take their highball glasses and travel to the informal classroom next door. There are vintage lockers on the wall next to a poster of the periodic table. Bar owner Lindsay Andrews is here, teaching a class on art and labor.
So a commodity is when an object is for someone else's use value.
Students sip their cocktails and get into a heady debate about art in the age of late capitalism. This is what Andrews had in mind when she first envisioned this business, Night School Bar. Cocktails alongside college-level classes in art, film, and literature.
I really just combined the two things I was doing already. I mean, I worked in restaurants.